and welcome to this webinar about the MA Educational Leadership and Practice, coming to you live from the University of Manchester on a very grey and windy, rainy day. Not to put you off Manchester, that's just the British weather, this side of the Peak District, this time of year. So the subtitle of this degree is Be the Positive Change in Your Educational Organisation. This degree has been put together by the Institute of Education of Manchester University that incorporates around about 5 to 6 of our leading academics in the field of educational leadership. These people are people such as Helen Gunter, Steve Courtney, Steve Rayner, Paul Armstrong, myself, and I am the course director or the program director. My name is Alex McTaggart, or Alexander Gardner-McTaggart, the long version. So yeah, there we are. I am myself an international educator. I've been teaching internationally since about 1995 in all different contexts. I've taught primary school, secondary school, and a lot in tertiary and also in further education. I was a senior lecturer in leadership at the Royal Military Academy Sandhurst before I came to Manchester, which gave me a very interesting alternative insight on leadership and leadership in education. Yeah, I've worked in the Middle East, I've worked in Europe, I've worked in the former Soviet diaspora. Yeah, and on this degree you'll be connected with all the members of our faculty. This is a Master of Arts degree over 2 years, and if you know Manchester University, you'll know that we're one of the leading universities in the world, and our cluster on educational leadership is world leading, not only in just our scholarship but also our research. That means that we generate a great deal of knowledge that informs the practice of educational leadership as it stands from the policy level right down to the school and the nursery and the college and even the classroom. Oops. Moving on. So what is this course about? Well, you've got some text in front of you. I won't talk about the text at the moment. I'll just tell you what I think this course is for. Very often, if you're a teacher, you'll find after several years of teaching, or even shorter or longer, that you might find yourself drawn towards more responsibility. This might be something that appeals to you. Perhaps you are particularly good at thinking in strategic ways. You're good at thinking about big pictures, about the big plan, and you want to pursue that. Very often it's difficult to make the next step into leadership, whether that be as a head of department or as a coordinator in a school, or up to an assistant principal perhaps, or a deputy principal or a principal. In international school sectors, then you'd even have the director as well, say, or the head. And sometimes, say in the international schools scene, people can fall into different positions just by luck of where they are, and being in the right place at the right time. And sometimes you'll find people who are already principals or vice principals who are quite good in their practice, but really feel like they need some rigorous qualification to back up what they're doing with some theory to give them the actual knowledge that they require. And in more national and state contexts, you'll often find that there are qualifications out there, like the National Head Teacher qualification and equivalents, but very often these qualifications don't actually address the big issues that a master's degree addresses. Think of it like this: when you do a master's degree, it's not so much like a PD course or a 2 or 3 week course where you learn particular skills that teach how to do a meeting or how to put together a budget plan. What we're talking about here is intellectual development, growing the human being, growing who you are as a person, and doing it in a specific way. And this one is tailored to grow you towards being a leader in education, not necessarily a manager or an administrator, but a leader. So it means it puts you in touch with higher order thinking, critical thinking, and all the skills and qualities that you need to hold your own at the very highest levels of leadership with other people who are also in those positions. So it's quite a transformative process, I would say. Okay, so the structure of the course is now what I'll talk about. There are 4 semesters over 2 years, and we start the course on the 24th of February. So it's important that if you are considering this master's degree, that you think about our application deadline, which is the 10th of February. So we're not far away from that. That's about 3 weeks away from now. So this is kind of the last push now of recruitment for this master's degree and for this intake. The course is then, say in semester 1, for example, in front of us here, we have the 2 units that will be dealt with. First of all, we start off with a conference. That's a 3-day conference here in Manchester, where we meet, where we get together, where you meet us, where we then teach you particular things that are relevant in the units that are coming up. It's like the first unit here, which is models of educational leadership. So when we talk about models of educational leadership, we're talking about leadership theory and what different types of theory there are and how they are viewed and how they are used. And throughout the whole process of the degree, we engage you in a critical process. So looking at these models, for example, and then picking them apart, and then looking at your own practice, and then looking at how you experience that, and whether you experience that, and have you seen it done to you, and have you done it to other people, and how could you do it better, and how could other people do it better, and what parts of what theory might help you in that process, for example. Then the other unit that we see here is engaging with educational research, which is a unit about looking at how we find knowledge and what is knowledge. So typically when you think about educational leadership, you know, how do you learn how to be a good leader in education? Well, you know, lots of people watch people they admired and say, oh, I wish I could be like that. Like maybe you had a good principal you worked under or a good leader. Sometimes you do it by saying, I don't want to be like that, and you think of a particularly bad principal you worked under. That's not how I want to be, and you try and be different from that. And accompanying all of that, there's a lot of literature that you can read up on, theory, for example, that tells us, so these are particularly good ways of leading, and these are not so good ways of leading. But what we look into in this unit is, how do you know that? Who is it who's conducting the research? Who is it who's generating the knowledge? Who does it serve? Is this serving government? Is this serving corporations? Is this serving children? Is this serving teachers? Who is behind this kind of process of knowledge generation? It's a very interesting unit, because by going through that unit, you will hopefully start to see that much of what we see in educational leadership is not what it seems at first sight. Okay, right, then in semester 2, which would then be starting off in September of this year, we'd start off with another conference. That would be another 3-dayer here in Manchester, and that would then lead into this unit here, which is leading educational change and development. So that will then look at change in schools, and as you're probably aware, no matter where you are in the world, whether you're here in Britain or in England or Scotland, or whether you're further afield, education is in a time of massive change all over the world, and this is partly driven by moves towards a more privatizing way of understanding the world. So if you go back to like the 1960s, the 1970s, even the 1980s, public education was very much a thing, and it was considered to be valuable in its own right, and public services were valuable in their own right. And since that time, we've seen a slow shift and change away from that way of thinking towards more sort of independent, autonomous, private ways of viewing education. So that unit there really looks at when change is driven in a school, who is it driven by, and who profits from it. And for example, when you try and make a school more efficient and better and more excellent, which is a word people love to use, when it's becoming more excellent, is it becoming more excellent for everybody? Is it really serving everybody in the community, or is it just serving a few? And these are issues that educational leaders need to be very much aware of when they're changing curriculums and when they're driving change, is to just who this impacts upon, and essentially how does your school contribute to society and culture, and what's behind all of these things. It's a very interesting unit, I find, that one. Then we have educational leadership policy, which would then start off in March of, so basically this time next year, so March of 2021. And that is an important one to look at. It's not always covered in leadership and management degrees. When you think about policy, policy can differ depending on the context. In a national or a state school, policy typically comes from government. So the ruling party, whatever it is, decides through their education minister or secretary, this is what the policy is in education, and this is now going to cascade down to leaders of schools, and then that's their responsibility to implement policy in schools. So it's very important for an educational leader to understand how policy is formed, and how it affects your day-to-day job, and how you, as an educational leader, then make sense of policy. And much as with leading educational change, how do you field policy to teachers and students who might, for example, be resistant to aspects of policy, who might not be into it, or for people who are really, really into it, but maybe need to understand more about the policy. So there's a lot in there in that one. And we're very lucky here to have as our professor of education policy, Helen Günther, who is a remarkable intellectual, and who has had a very firm hand in creating this unit here. Well, I'm co-creating it with her, but she's basically sort of laid the foundations for that unit there. Very good one. Right, and then in semester 3, so that would then start in hold on, was I saying the wrong date before? May have done. Semester 3 is then starts off with a 3-day conference again, and then goes straight into the educational leadership as a social practice. So this is then the concluding unit of the set units that you do, because you do 5 set units, right? So that's the last one, and that's looking at how educational leadership is actually very, very different from other forms of leadership. And I can testify that, having been a lecturer in military leadership before and other forms of leadership, education really is different, and you need a different approach to leadership. And so this would explore looking at it as a social practice. So, think about the nature of schools. What are they? They're collegial spaces. Think of the teachers. Teachers typically all went to university. They're all graduates. They're all brights. They're all qualified. So that in its own, it makes them a remarkable group of people who thrive on things like collegiality, mutual respect, and professionalism. And yet all of us in education are often very surprised about how little effort is expended on professionality and collegiality, and how actually a successful educational leader is very good at doing that, but they are good at working collegially with their colleagues. Consider the fact that the educational leader is not necessarily a colonel in the army or a general. They are like everybody else. They are a teacher. They just happen to be the head teacher, or the teacher who at that particular moment for administrative matters is the leader. But consider also that throughout a day or a week in a school, different teachers at different times will take on leadership roles and know more than other people, or influence more than other people. So I think that is a very, very nice unit to finish our set units on, because it's a sort of looking forward to the future as to how leadership can work particularly well for you as an educational leader. And then the last segment that we have, the last slot there, before we go into our project work, is the optional units. So I personally think we're very lucky on this degree here to have, it's not down there, as we haven't added it yet because we've just had it approved. It's now going through the approval process. Leadership in international schools. So that's my field, and this draws on my original research. And in fact, I was just in Hong Kong 3 weeks ago giving a keynote on exactly this this topic at the Asia International Schools Conference, Asia Pacific International Schools Conference. So that is very much about, for people who are considering a career in international schools or who are already in international schools, don't forget that there are, 500,000 staff already in international schools. There are only 475,000 teachers in England. So there's a huge amount of teachers already there. And we see a lot of teachers from Britain leaving for international schools. So as far as I know, there are very few, if any, other degrees that offer this particular unit, which would set you up to understand what the particular challenges are of leading an international school, because believe me, they are significantly different from state schools and private schools in national contexts. So that's an optional unit you can take. The other optional unit is digital media and information literacy. That's interesting because you think about how much leadership now occurs through the medium of, say, the laptop, through emails. How, 30 years ago, all the issues were always dealt with in a face-to-face manner, or it was on a letter sent home, whereas today, a lot of the quick interaction that happens in this medium here. What does that mean for us and our jobs, and how does that affect us? And the other one is then, the other optional is then leading learning. So how can you lead learning as, let's say, from an instructional point of view? How can you lead your teachers to be learners as well as the students to be learners? And then another alternative that you can do is APL, which is accreditation for prior learning. So if you've done some modules at postgraduate level before at a university that we recognize, then you can claim that instead of doing an optional unit. And then for those 10 weeks or so, you would then sort of have a break. Right, so those are then the taught components of the course, and those are 3 semesters of the 4. In the final semester of the course, we have an interesting research skills suite, which is a grouping of 3 short research units that are basically the same as one of our normal units. So you'll be looking there at how to structure research. Now, most master's degrees have a big component on research. So it's usually it's about 60 of the credits are on research. In this one, it's only combined, I think, it's around about 30 that we do, which is actually teaching research, and that would come there. The reason why that's important is because as a leader, you need to have a grasp on how knowledge is generated and how we understand what truth is, and higher order thinking and strategizing. And that's what research skills do for you. They give you an insight in how to understand where knowledge is coming from, how reliable it is, how valid it is, how you yourself, if you need to make a case for something, or if you need to support an argument somewhere, how can you do that on your own without having to get external help to do it? And I think those research skills are really important for that, and we have them there. And then the last little bit is the project. So it's not like a huge thesis project that you often have at the end of the master's. It's about half the size of that. And that is then focused upon an element of your practice, and it's highly reflective. And that's, as the title suggests, education leadership in practice. It's about you, and it's about how you work. And you're tutored through that whole process by me or by one of our other tutors. But initially, it'll certainly be with me in this first rollout here. And that will mean that you'll have me as your tutor, meaning that we'll have regular tutorial check-ins. If you're in Manchester, they'll be face-to-face. If you're further afield, they'll be via video conferencing. So that would mean that I would need to speak to you on a regular basis and work through with you where your thinking is. And this is actually a process that would probably start a lot earlier on in the course, leading you up to this project here. Good. Right. So where will the course take you? Again, there's some text there. Read the text in your own leisure. I'll talk about basically what I think. So in terms of career ambitions, like I said earlier, if you want to become a principal of a school, this is the course for you, right? If you want to become a head, if you want to move up from being a teacher to a coordinator or a head of department, this is all highly relevant for you. This is the kind of course that you put in your CV when you apply for one of those jobs and people see, oh, head leadership. That's exactly the kind of qualification that you need for that. What's special about it, I would say, is that it's current and it's new. Many of the other offerings out there from other places were written 10 years ago or 20 years ago, and many of them only have about a third of the component is actually ed leadership and management. The rest is then general education and then the thesis. This is in its entirety educational leadership from beginning to end. So it's a very specialized master's degree for those people aiming for leadership in education. After your master's, well, I mean, I can remember when I did my master's degree a long time ago, it reinvigorated my practice. I become a bit frustrated with my teaching, with my practice, and it made me reconsider everything from the beginning. It made me love teaching again, and it made me love the job that I did because it gave me the depth. It made me understand that there was so much more to it, and that it is indeed a noble profession and probably one of the most important professions there is in the world, even if it's not recognized that way. But it gave me that value when I did my master's. It definitely will give you confidence for leadership roles. Think about those high-level conversations that you might have every now and then. Sometimes we lack the vocabulary. Sometimes we lack the conceptual understanding. Sometimes we lack the overview in order to be able to engage. And very often we lack the criticality to be able to see in the meeting where power is coming from and how it's being used and where there are openings and where there are opportunities. That's what this master's degree is about. It's about developing those competencies within you over a longer period of time, over 2 years. So like not a quick fix weekend gig, but literally over the course of 2 years, developing your thinking and developing your criticality. The skills that you'll learn, talk mostly about them. So predominantly intellectual skills. Now, don't be mistaken by thinking that you're going to come into this course and after the first 2 weeks walk away going, oh, I know how to do leadership. Let me tell you, as a specialist in leadership, leadership is not something that you can learn in a weekend course or in a PD session. If anyone tells you that, then they're not teaching you leadership, because leadership is an intellectual capacity, right? It's about values, it's about very strongly about ethics, and it's about intellectualism. And what this course does is it grows all of those things. So that's essentially what you learn, is you learn to be the bigger thinker, the strategic thinker, the critical thinker, You've probably got most of the skills that you actually need to be a leader. But you will also learn things like, you'll learn about functional leadership. You'll learn things that aren't necessarily purely intellectual. So there are lots of different components to it, and I think it's relatively balanced compared to many other offerings. Yeah, and what you'll also get in this course is a global network. So you get to meet and mix with a whole bunch of other people who are like you, who are on a trajectory. They're going somewhere in education. That's why they're doing this degree at Manchester. And those people will be people you'll know for the rest of your life, because they will be the network of people that you've done the course with. You also get to know all of us as well here at Manchester, which may be helpful for you as you move forward. So I think that's a crucial component, which is often left out of many blended courses, is that you don't necessarily generate the network. Like I was talking to someone the other day and they said, oh yes, but at University XYZ, there were 400 of us and we do a summer course for 2 weeks at this beautiful campus. And I was thinking, yeah, there are 400 of you, but 400 of you means how many of those people actually were part of your cohort and your group? In this one here, you are part of a cohort of up to 20 people. And it's quite an intimate group, and it's quite a strong group. I think that's a real strength of this course. So the practical details, yeah, face-to-face workshops at the conferences in Manchester in spring and in autumn. There are 6 20-credit units, which are called modules, but they're units we call them. And the first 5 are mandatory, and the 6th one is an optional, or it can be replaced with accreditation for prior learning. You need to reckon in about 15 hours of study per week, but that's standard for a master's degree. For those of you who don't like exams, you'll be happy to hear there are no exams. So there are practical and reflective assessments, but you are tutored on all of these assessments. So there are at least 3 tutorials leading up to the assessment. What I'm also offering on this is that you can submit for your assignments, you can submit a draft copy if you submit it on time, and I'm more than happy to review your draft copy and send it back to you before you submit the final copy. And I found in the past this is particularly helpful on blended courses, and especially with participants who are international. So it's just a little added bit of support there. It's a 2-year course, as you can see. And then we have the conference, we have the face-to-face sessions, we have online video, and we have the Blackboard and PebblePad interactive web interface. Right, so the entry requirements are a good honours degree. There's in Britain and sort of comparable systems, that would be a 2-1 or the overseas equivalent. However, we are also prepared to look at your professional background and take this also into consideration. So it can happen that you may have we had a case recently of someone who had I think a 2-2, and it was from a degree they did in 1998, but they've been a principal for the last 10 years. So this person is, in my view, absolutely the right kind of person for this course. And so I will accept someone with that onto the course. And in fact, that's what we did. And now he's joined the course. The February intake is coming up. It's £11,000 paid in instalments, which I think is particularly reasonable in this day and age. And the application deadline is on Monday, the 10th of February, so in about 3 weeks. So that's me done, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. So now I'm going to hand over to Katie, or I'm just going to camera over here.
Hello, so I'm Katie. I'm one of the course advisors for Education, Leadership and Practice, and we just had a few questions that have come through. So one of the questions is, what are the benefits of studying and coming to the conference?
Right. Okay. So you got to look at it this way. You know, when you do an online course, there are 2 ways of looking at it. On the one hand, an online course is a great thing for people because it means that they can do it flexibly in their own time. The other way you can look at it is it's a bit of a disappointment because you don't actually get to engage with other people. You don't make friends on the course. You don't build a network of people that you'll know. You don't get to meet the professors. And let's face it, we're Manchester, and half of our professors here are very well known and quite famous, and they would be the people who teach you. So when you come to the conference, you get to mix and mingle with all of these people, and you get the real university experience. And I think that's incredibly motivating also for your learning. It also helps you put a face to a name. It also makes you feel like being part of the university. And we are a great university, and we do have a very proud tradition. And I think if you didn't come to the conference, you'd be missing out on all of those aspects. You don't have to come to the conference. We're not going to, chastise you for not coming, but we highly, highly recommend that you come, because it's part of the added value. You can take the degree as it is and go through and not come to Manchester even once and still walk away with that piece of paper with Manchester on it, but then you'd be missing out on all that rich value that comes with studying at Manchester. So I would really, really urge you to, push out the boat and go the extra mile to come to the conference, because it is absolutely worth it.
Okay, and I think we have time for one more question. One that's come through is, what type of topics can you do on the project?
So the topics that you can do are, so this is, because we're quite a research-based university, the topics that you would choose would be topics that you would choose. So you can choose what you want to do. Naturally, you'd have to do it through working with me, and we together would talk about this. You might say, for example, I'm running a project at the moment in the school, and I want to explore how, for example, a distributed leadership approach might inform that, and I want to investigate this process. And then I would talk to you about that and maybe give you a couple of hints and tips as to how to do it. Or I might, if I think it's not going to work particularly well, I might try and then sort of rephrase that for you or get it to move in a different direction. But I would say that the limit of topics is really up to you and your imagination and your own professional practice, because what we're trying to do is we're trying to build you and support you. So the things that you feel are relevant will be relevant topics for you to do in the project.
Okay, thank you very much. So there was a few questions that have just come through, but I will send an email to them because I think we're running a little bit out of time.
Okay.
And so if you have any further questions, then you can contact us on studyonline@manchester.ac.uk or give the telephone number a ring. So it's 016 136 8333. And the application deadline is the 10th of February. So if you'd like to send your application off before that date. Okay, so thank you very much, Alex. Thank you.
Thank you, Katie.
Bye.